Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Our guest today, Pat Wetzel, is an award-winning author, blogger, and photographer. Pretty artsy stuff, right? Well, Pat also holds a degree from the Wharton Business School in finance and worked in New York doing strategic planning and corporate investment analysis, among many other business services. More recently now, she has been involved with a number of startups, including a current one called CancerRoadTrip. In 2009, Pat was diagnosed with incurable cancer. And then, after several years of chemo, radiation, and surgery, Pat now enjoys a life in remission, a whole new life. Pat is also a fellow podcaster with her award-winning show, Bump in the Road. And a bump in the road is something we have all experienced. Pat Wetzel is very intentional about the way she lives her life, with intellect, humor, and incredible stories. Pat is with us today to share her journey into what we are calling how she stumbled into soaring. With that, let's welcome Pat Wetzel on the show. Pat, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Charlie, thank you.
It's so good to have you on the show. I really, we had, as all our guests know, I have a pre-phone call with my guest, and I have to tell everybody, I so enjoyed our conversation that I got so involved in the conversation I failed to take notes. And so I don't have notes of our conversation, but it's all from memory and all from checking things out. So this is going to be a very fun and sort of innovative and intuitive show. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
I am too.
Good. I'll tell you what, Pat, I have a boatload of things I want to talk to you about, but I think we might first get into your personal history just a bit. Now, if I understand correctly, you were a successful business advisor in New York, and somewhere around 2009, you hit a major bump in the road. Can you talk to me about that story?
Yeah, in 2009, I was diagnosed with a fairly rare, hopefully manageable, but not curable lymphoma. And it stopped my world dead. I would go through the next, 5 or 6 years of treatments. They'd work for a while, then they wouldn't work, and I had to go back into treatment. And just incredible emotional and psychological ups and downs that go with that type of journey.
What kind of emotional ups and downs? I mean, I can imagine them, but I'd like to hear from someone who's experienced it, what those may be like.
I think one common element of the cancer experience is isolation. It is, you're isolated from life. Your life goes off on this tangent and everyone else's goes on. Some people stay with you, some don't. And you are left very much alone, very dislocated from the rest of life to weather this experience. And I think that it has a profound impact on rearranging your values and how you experience life. There's also an existential piece of it. You're facing your mortality. What if I die? Have I lived my life? Am I happy where I am? And it brings up a lot of questions. And I think also for me, it brought up a need for control. And after doing a lot of homework and whatnot, control really boiled down to 4 things that Dean Ornish at UCSF noted in one of his studies with men with prostate cancer. And it really came down to nutrition, the quality of your food, and the choices you make, exercise, stress management, and connection with others. And I would add in there really are 4, some of these overlap a little bit, attention to your mental health.
Those are things that don't get, the last 2 things you mentioned don't get described very much. We talk about exercise, eating right, doing those sorts of things, but we don't talk about our mental health and our stability of where we think we're going, what we think we're doing. Those psychological impacts, affect our physiology so powerfully.
Hugely. And mental health, I think, is so important, and it's something we don't talk about nearly enough. I would say that for me, cancer taught me that my mental health has to be my number one priority. I learned to meditate because of cancer and some other events during that time period. And meditation for me has been game-changing and is one of my primary paths in terms of mental health.
Do you, how frequently do you meditate? Daily?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes more than once.
Sometimes more than once, yes. I have found, I'm the same. I have found the quiet, the solitude, and the total sort of almost immovable, just sitting there. I do mine actually sitting on a bed, and I feel like I sink 6 inches into the bed. I'm sitting with my back very straight. I'm not laying down. It's just a habit I formed for the last 4 years. That physical relaxation is something that I don't hear talked about in meditation that much, but it is so powerful for me.
Yeah, I think both the physical relaxation, but the mental relaxation and expansion that you can experience through silence. And then the takeaway corollary to that, when you move back into your so-called real life, is you're developing the ability to witness your mind. And all of a sudden, that opens the door to making conscious decisions.
Isn't that a big thing with you, is witnessing your mind, Pat? Isn't that a subject that you find that's very dear to your heart?
Well, I think it's interesting for all of us, because until we can become aware of our thought patterns, we'll just senselessly act them out again and again. Awareness is the key.
That really is. I don't know if I told you, but again, everybody knows, I am a student or not a convert, but I'm immersed in the late medieval Christian mystics. And silence, solitude, contemplation are key disciplines in that tradition. And I'm fortunately, as a retired guy, retired from, I don't make money, but I do a lot of stuff. And I still am able to find significant time in contemplation and silence, and that sort of reevaluation or look at my mind, my thoughts, my patterns, my habits, my good parts, my bad parts. All of that just is so enlightening, and is in the process, I find I've become what I would call a much better person. Would you find that as well?
Oh, yeah. I think the journey within is the most significant journey we can take. And as we get to know ourselves and as we become more conscious and get to choose the path we want to take, it changes our life. We start relating to people differently. We relate to ourselves differently. Therefore, our relationships change. And I think they change for the better because they have more empathy and kindness towards others.
How do you feel, you talked about relationship with yourself impacts your relationship with others. Talk to me a little bit, because I so agree. First of all, let me let you know that I so agree. But how do you explore or find relationship with yourself? Are there any processes or anything that you went through that gave you insight into that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a good answer, but I think part of it goes back to what you were saying earlier, and that is the quiet, the solitude, the reflection. And I think a willingness to step back and look at yourself with kindness, but also, with reality, and realize we're all imperfect. What are some of the imperfections you see in yourself, and how would you prefer them to manifest?
Yeah, the easiest way for me to find imperfections in myself is to find out what I criticize in other people.
Oh, that's so true.
Isn't it?
Yes.
It's like, they're demonstrating the bad me, and I'm trying to change myself by criticizing them. I think that is the most powerful marker any of us can have. And actually, that opens up some really interesting doors of inquiry, because if you pick up on something in someone else
You are obviously picking up on something that resonates with you. And to sit and think about that and where it comes from and why your emotions are what they are with the stimulus, it's quite a journey.
Well, it's such a fun journey. Two things. I want to talk more about the journey, but I want to talk also about it is becoming in some circles, this contemplative, silent, self-reflection, reinventing your life is sort of like a go-to, something that is becoming popular, so to speak, in certain traditions in the United States. And yet, I think, as with most philosophies, only a few people really delve into, take the time, because it takes time and energy and self-sacrifice to get there. And I'm not sure everybody's prepared to pay those wages for that privilege.
No, I think we live in a society that's fascinated with the external, with material things, with status and rank, and none of that translates into knowing yourself.
Oh, you're so right. This is why I love talking to you. You're just you get things. In the mystical tradition, we talk about the ego, but two parts of the ego. The ego is not all bad. The ego is written by so many people as bad. We got to get rid of the ego, dismiss the ego this. But without a strong ego, we're nothing. So we have to have a good, solid, sound ego that is not, may I say, egocentric. And egocentric is what one contemplative calls the small self or the small self, or the small self or the false self. And that is, I've kind of narrowed it down to very close to your definition. It's all about how can I acquire power, prestige, and possessions. And those control my life. That controls what I try to achieve in life. And it's square pegs and round holes. I'm dealing with a spiritual malady, with a deep emotional hole inside of me, and I'm trying to fill that hole with the power, prestige, and possessions. That it is a square peg, round hole. They do not fit. So, all the efforts we do not really satisfy the depths of the soul. Would you agree that?
Oh, I totally agree. And we develop this outside persona of accomplishments and degrees and homes and cars and whatever else you might throw in there.
Pat, don't get personal. Go ahead.
They're so meaningless. And until we can see that, we will not be satisfied.
They're so meaningless in the scope of life. As an American, although I travel quite a bit internationally, I'm still steeped in American ideology. As an American, those are our goals in life. That is the American dream, is it not? The American dream is not to be a fully integrated person that understands self, love, and society. Instead of, it's all about acquisition, toys.
How do you think that dream is working out for us?
Well, I'll tell you, I was raised in what I call, to me, it appears as if it was the golden years of the United States in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, but especially the 50s. Those were our golden years where all of that worked, but that was because we were coming from nothing. Now that we've established something, we've established a near middle class, 64%, 62% of the country is middle class or above. So, we never talk about that. We only talk about the other side, the downsides. We don't talk about the majority of Americans are middle class. And the only thing we can think about is not, moving up Maslow's chart from safety and security, but moving 3 or 4 levels up to try to get spiritual maturity, but we're still just doing it in those lower level physical ways, and it just will never accomplish it.
No, and I think it's a journey. I think that I will only speak for myself. I've had to hit numerous bumps in the road, if you will. Each one taught me something, and over time I became willing to learn. but it took a while.
What took a while? What was it, Pat, that seemed to... Was there a situation? Was it your cancer? Was it something else that gave you a rude awakening or a distinct awakening to something new, that you were pursuing your path maybe not the best way?
Well, I've had a lot of awakenings. I think actually one of the biggest and most difficult to navigate when I was younger was a really brutal divorce. And it left me in a place I never wanted to live. I've lost all my family going through that, obviously an ex-husband. It was a time of total upheaval in my life, in my identity, in my finances, in everything. And it took me many years, I think, to have the perspective to glean some wisdom from that set of circumstances. And not being able to glean wisdom at that time, I just plowed ahead, and that's how I got into becoming a pilot.
Oh, I'm going to hold that just for a second, because I want to know about you flying an airplane with no engine. We're going to talk about the insanity and the beauty, the incredible restfulness of that. But I wanted to get on the first topic that, I get off on one, I forget the first topic. But what was the very first thing you said before you told that? Can you remind me?
Oh, we're just talking about bumps and what we learn from them. And I brought up the my bump of divorce. That
yes.
Was it would be the pivot point that would change my life in ways I never could have imagined.
There's two situations in your life that you have identified in our brief talk together, both seem to focus around the issue of loneliness. Do you find that you become out of connection with other people and out of connection with yourself when you're facing these trying situations?
I think you often become disconnected from the outside world, but that's an opportunity to become connected with your inside world. And when you're connected there, you're never lonely.
How do you do that, Pat?
Trial and error in a lot of years.
And a will, do you think it requires... There's a willingness that is, I don't know if it's a human tendency, but it's a very natural tendency for me and for those that I know, is to live in denial. And those interior desires are just kind of pushed to a side, and all of this external stuff really boils up to the top, and that's where we end up focusing. And what you're saying is that we have to be able to somehow turn the burners on simmer and cool down and evaluate. Did that make any sense?
I would say it makes total sense. And I think even beyond putting the burners on simmer, I think we need to look outside the box and decide, what's a new tact I can take?
Well, let's talk about a new tact, and let's talk about you. And you didn't use the word glider. You used another term for them.
Sailplane.
A sailplane?
Uh-huh.
Is there a difference between a glider and a sailplane?
No, I think a glider is kind of a generic term.
Okay.
Sailplanes usually refer to higher performing planes, and people within the community would call it a sailplane.
Oh, so if you want to be cool, call it a sailplane. Don't call it a glider.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll have to remember that. So tell me all about, how did you get into this? What is the love affair? Because you have quite a few accomplishments in sailplane flying, right?
Oh, I think just flying is an accomplishment. I got into it by chance. When my marriage was falling apart, I went on a cross-country trip to just connect with some different people and think about where am I going in my life. I had no answers to anything. And this was about 1990. I went to San Francisco. I rented a convertible, and I drove up into wine country and had a nice few days. And I ended up in Calistoga one night. And walking the street the next morning, there's an airport that used to be in the middle of town. It intersects the main street, and it has a big sign that says glider rides. So I went up and I asked, "What's the story?" And they said, "I'll come back around 11 or noon, and we'll be happy to take you for a ride." So I came back at the appointed time, and I went for a ride, and it didn't blow me away in any way. It was a nice experience, and I just kind of put it to the side. So I went back to Pennsylvania, where I was living at the time, and I heard about a bunch of lawyers that were flying gliders out of a private airfield in Pennsylvania. So I called them up, and I introduced myself, and I invited myself out for the weekend. And it was a holiday weekend. I flew for 3 straight days, and I was totally hooked. And that was the beginning of the end. But stop me if you want. It's a long story. I flew out of Campbell Airport for a while. I soloed Sam Harry, who was a World War II aviator, was my flight instructor. He was an amazing pilot. And he had several airplanes, and he had one, which was a 126, which is a single-seat sailplane set up just for me. You weigh and balance the plane so that, it flies properly. We had that weighed and balanced just for me, so I could show up at the airport and go fly for the day. Well, I showed up one day at the airport, and it was a beautiful day. Oh, the clouds were popping, and it was going to be a glorious day to go flying. And my plane wasn't available because Sam had promised it to somebody for an air show. I was beyond furious. Now, you have to understand that soaring is totally addictive. I was an addict. There's no question about it. It is the most amazing thing I've ever done. But I was just furious. And I had heard a number of pilots on the radio, on the soaring frequency, and I knew they flew out of an airport somewhere down near Maryland. And I didn't know where, and I didn't know who they were, but I decided I would track them down that day and see what was out there. I needed some new options. I was not happy. So I drove south, and I pulled into I found the airport, and I pulled in. There's a big sign at the entrance that says private airfield or private club. Do not enter. You are not welcome.
I love it.
Really
You said my kind of place?
No, I looked at this and I was just taken back. I've been flying this wonderful, fun, but low performance sailplane. And here I had entered this massive airport with 3 or 4 runways, control tower, fuel depot, hangars, several hangars. And I thought, this is really cool. And sitting on the tarmac are 15 or 20 15-meter planes. These planes are fiberglass airplanes that are stunning. They're essentially handcrafted, and they are super high performance. And I looked at this, and I watched a plane take off into this beautiful blue sky with these puffy clouds, and my heart just went with that plane. And I walked into the office, and I joined on the spot. But I didn't have an airplane to fly, so I had to remedy that. And that's kind of how the sailplane adventures really started.
So you purchased a plane?
I did. I went on a national quest to find. I went to shows. I went to airfields. I went everywhere. I had no idea what I was doing.
No kidding.
And I went to one get-together, and I was curious about this one type of plane. And I tried to talk to the rep for the manufacturer, but he wouldn't talk to me because I was a woman, and, women aren't really going to buy a plane.
Oh, really? What year was this?
Oh.
Was this recent?
That would have been about 1992 or 3.
Okay. Oh, so you've been flying for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not flying right now, but I soaring was like the focal point of my life for about a decade.
Okay. One thing I think about, when you told me you took your first trip and you were passenger with another person, but I imagine, now this is my imagination, and tell me how accurate it is, that when you are by yourself, and I imagine you're not listening to AC/DC on your headphones, so you don't, it is total silence, and just total, you can't help but consume the beauty and the wonder and the floatfulness, the weightlessness. All, they're just. It just seems. It sounds magnificent to me.
Oh, it is total magic.
How fun!
It's just extraordinary, but it's not necessarily as quiet as you think. Now, when you get into better performing planes, it's sealed and it's very silent. But you have what they call an audio variometer, which gives you an audio indication of the air around you, if it's going up or going down. So the audio is usually chirping in the background. You can turn it off, but you actually want to have that information so that you're putting your plane in better air.
Well, that makes sense, but that's almost like contemplative silent meditation, in that I have a subject that I'm pondering, so there is that noise. There's not physical noise, but there's the noise of my thought, but I try to keep my thought in this arena. And so it's not just blank, there is something inside of it that sort of helps give me stability and direction, rather than just complete openness for the monkey mind to go nuts.
Well, one of the things that happens with a sport like soaring is, one, you work very hard to develop your skills. You test your skills against the sky. And that can lead to flow, the state of flow. And, that's part of the addiction of the sport. The incredible beauty of soaring at 17,000 feet down a mountain spine. It's unbelievable.
It's a little bit harrowing to think about, because you've got no engine. Where are you going to land this thing? I'm thinking of all of these tactical. It's fine being up there, but how am I going to get myself down?
Well, what was really interesting about this? I started flying as I was going through this divorce, and it was part life wish, part death wish, quite honestly. I had gotten to the point where I lost everything, and I didn't care anymore. And that was I wasn't looking for death, but I wouldn't avoid it either. I just felt whatever. But the life wish piece that emerged from this was unbelievable, because soaring is just so beautiful. It becomes very spiritual. You're working in the flow. It's just a magical experience. It's one I would wish for everybody, however they choose to experience it.
Do you feel that both of those opposites are sort of essential for living a life worth having a life worth living? And one is the side of where I'm anticipating the beauty, the goodness, what can go on, but the other side of knowing this is not eternal. That this is so how much more important is it for me to enjoy this present moment, because it may not occur again, and you can't have that without a full, or without at least some acknowledgement of you're going to die sometime, not necessarily on this trip, but that is part of your Weltanschauung.
Well, that was actually part of the edge of it, though. During one 3-year period, 25 pilots died. One was shot in San Francisco, but the other 24 were all aviation-related deaths. And
so it's a very real thing.
Well, it's something that is there. The days when you wake up and you're going to go fly, everything's a little clearer and crisper and more beautiful. You're a little bit more aware.
Oh, that's incredible. You know what I want to do, Pat, is I'm going to kind of continue. We're not going to talk about flying, but we're going to continue talking about life development. But we need to take a quick break first, okay?
Sure thing.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And my very special guest today is Pat Wetzel, who has so many life experiences. She has nonprofits. She has a podcast. She's an author. She's a blogger. She's a pilot of sailplanes. Is that right?
Sailplanes.
Sailplanes, which is, us layman terms is a glider, and, we're talking about the beauty of that. But you know what I want to do, Pat? I read a quote from you, and I would like you to expand on this quote. And you said, and this has to do with actually embracing and living a life that you think really matters. And you wrote this: every day we make choices in the food we eat, the thoughts we think, and the people we associate with. I call it our matrix. So what is your matrix, and how do you choose to reimagine your health and your world? It's a beautiful quote. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Well, I think that in every moment we have the power to create. So what do we choose to create? Do we choose to eat something laden with sugar, or do we make a healthier choice? We have that power of choice at each and every step. What do we choose to think? Do we choose to let our monkey mind run wild, look at things around us and be critical? Or do we choose to search for peace and meaning? Do we choose? It's all a matter of choice. And I think that we often forget how powerful our choice is in determining our world. And I know for me, in terms of the people and the energy they bring into my life, I look for people who, I enjoy people who are different than me, who are smart, who are aware, and who like to have conversations like this one.
You said a word that means a lot to me, and it was in the midst of a string of very important adjectives or nouns, I'm not sure, but you use the word peace, and that has become for me a primary word in my spiritual vocabulary. We talk a lot, we talk about love a lot in the Christian community, but it is not very well used. But the word we don't talk a lot about, and it is used, it's the second most used noun of its type character noun in Scripture, and it's peace. And I think, the peace of God is huge in the Scripture, and I think it's not just peace of warfare, but it's peace of families, it's peace of culture, and it's especially as we're working on ourselves, it's peace with ourself, that we are not, how frequently is our greatest competitor and our greatest adversary ourself, that we don't fully believe we can do what we want to do, and there is no peace in that. There is a thing of peace, of letting go, of accepting, of fully embracing, enjoying the good times, and not enjoying the difficult times, but understanding they are learning times, and that we are going to become even better people as a result of that. I really like the idea of peace.
I do too, and I know that for me, the peace I find in meditation follows me into the rest of my life, because it's always with me and I can access it at any time. And it gives me that pause in the middle of a situation to decide how I want to react.
I'm silent because that's a very powerful statement, and I don't think it's said enough. I know it's not done enough, but it is. You make a choice. It's the Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. It's all about choice, and it's all about choice of not the situation, but how we interpret and deal with the situation, and it requires what you just said. It requires a thoughtful approach, a reflective, thoughtful approach, and we are, I was just, believe it or not, I was just a guest on a podcast yesterday, which is not real normal for me, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was a delightful show, and two women called Two Average Girls. I really enjoyed working with them. But we talked about this concept of understanding the need to delve into myself personally and try to understand me, and in the understanding me, I can understand others.
I think that's so true. I think that you have to have compassion for yourself before you can have compassion for others.
I told him I went on a retreat in 2020, and it was a 10-day retreat. 6 days were silence, and I mean they were sequestered silence. They took phones, computers, books. All they left you was a handwritten journal that you could write in, and you could not leave your room or a 10-foot area in front of your hut for 6 solid days. And then, they had ceremonies on other days, but it was just dealing with you. I mean, you couldn't even walk. We were in Hawaii, and you couldn't even walk around enjoying nature. You just had to sit there and deal with yourself. Now, even for the introvert and solitude and contemplative person, there were moments of challenge in that, but it was so rewarding. Now, my intent, Pat, in going there, I had an intention. They like you to have intention for this retreat, and mine was to learn how to accept love. I discovered I was decent at giving love and kindness to other people, but I had a hard time truly embracing and accepting love of others. There was this little haunting voice in me that said, if you only really knew me, you would never say that kind of thing about me. And that's a terrible thing to tell yourself, and yet that was my intent for this 10-day retreat, which was very, very helpful. It was sort of a paradigm shifter for me.
How did it shift your paradigm, and what did you learn?
No one's ever asked me that, to get detailed on it, so this is going to be my first attempt. I think it was a very deep process, and there was a lot of there was a lot of procedures that were very, very helpful, and I think I learned that in what I called, boy, I'm going to get very vulnerable here, and I'm probably going to have Paul erase this but I'm going to get very vulnerable here, and that I felt in some ways I was a disgusting human being, and this helped me to learn to accept, in the nature of the human condition and in the divine condition, disgusting is not an adjective. It is merely part of the human condition, and merely part of the human condition that can be resolved, and can be, I don't know about resolved, but can certainly be dealt with by grace and love. And I understood my disgusting was not disgusting. It was my interpretation of a quite normal human condition. And in doing that, I was able to sort of reconcile myself to the fact that I'm a normal human being. This is okay, and it's just another opportunity for evolution, shall we say, maturity. Did that explain any?
Yeah, no, that's incredibly powerful, because it goes to what lens we use to view our world. One of the things I say in my book, which will be out next year.
Oh yeah, I was looking for your book and I didn't find it. So is that the Bump in the Road book?
That's the first one. There will be a series. The next one will be Bump in the Road, Strong Women.
Right.
The first one's kind of an anthology. And one of the things I suggest in the book is, put down a timeline of your life and write down the significant events. Write your story from a perspective of gratitude. Write your story from a perspective of love. Choose your emotion. And the reason for doing that is it allows you to use a different lens, maybe than the one you're using, to see your own story differently.
That's brilliant. It is so much we understand life through our own particular lens, so our own history of experience, our parenting, our, ever so influential adolescent group that is much more powerful than we ever give it credit for. And, then our early adulthood and as it goes on, but we're so influenced by other people that I like investigating that. I think you're really onto something.
Yeah, we can tell our story in so many different ways. What do we choose? It goes back to that matter of consciousness and choice.
Okay, you know what I want to do, because I'm looking at this metaphor that you used when we talked before, and so this really is so we're jumping from football to basketball. We're going to a different track, but I so want to hear about a quote that you used, and I was going to state the man's name, but the last name was impossible for me to pronounce, so I just decided to let you do it. But it's a quote about quitters, campers, and climbing. That defines, to some degree, all of us sort of fit into one of those categories of at different times in life. This does not define who we are as an individual necessarily, but it does define certain attributes of. Can you elaborate on this quitters, campers, and climbers? I think it's so helpful for our audience.
I love this quote. It's from Eric Weinmeier, who I was so lucky to have him on the podcast. He is an amazing person. At 16, he went blind, and he went on to climb Mount Everest, the 7 summits, and to kayak solo through the Colorado River Rapids. He also founded an organization called No Barriers, where the essence of it was originally focused on the disability community. Now it's really focused on a broader range of people, and they have at least annual get-togethers. And the essence of it is, your biggest barriers within yourself. You really don't have any barriers. You can do whatever you want to do. But Eric divided the world into 3 groups of people. And these groups are fluid. You can move between them. And the groups are quitters, who are self-evident. Then we have campers. Campers want the status quo more than anything. They don't want anything to change. And then we have climbers, who are kind of self-evident as well. Now, climbers can be campers, because you can't be a climber all the time. It would be too exhausting. But the reality is that the majority of people fall in that middle group of campers. I am personally fascinated by what it takes for somebody to go from being a camper to becoming a climber.
And what did you discover is the transition?
A lot of people don't make it. I saw that in the cancer community. So many people just stay
just
stuck.
Kind of throw in the towel?
Stuck. They may become a victim. They don't see it as an opportunity for any sort of transformation. And believe me, it's an opportunity nobody wants. I get that. But you don't have control over that. This event has been thrown in your path. What will you do with it? I think the people who move from being campers to climbers are the people who are willing to take risks, become self-aware, and challenge themselves. And I think that they're the people who live the richest, fullest lives.
You see, what you're describing, Pat, is very critical, the distinction from which I almost read it to the way you're talking about it. You're talking about interiority. You're talking about quitters in our interior, our campers, and our climbers. I took it a bit more literally, and here was the question I had for you. Because I took it in sort of social context rather than a personal context of quitters, campers, and climbers, and the world, not the United States, but the world, because I do quite a bit of international travel, and a lot in developing world, in third world countries, and And campers are where everybody wants to be, and it's just not that they want to hang where they're at. They would like to be camping in what I determined is a familiar campground, someplace that it's like, but they have no sort of, there is not. I was explaining to people, my friends in Uganda, in rural Uganda, that are dirt poor. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There is only today, because every day is exactly the same. And, there is no upward mobility. So what I was wondering, and maybe I've just gone way out of what you're trying to say, but it almost appeared to me, at least sociologically, that climbers are almost an American invention, in that we are, in our pursuit of the American dream, we always want to be climbers. We are never satisfied, or we fail to be satisfied by a status quo, even if it's a satisfactory status quo. Now, I'm not saying there shouldn't be evolution and growth, but climbers sort of insinuates, sort of some kind of radical change. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that climbers are throughout humanity. I think that certainly in this country we have that individualistic spirit, but we also have a victim spirit. So I think it boils down to the individual, actually, and how you view life. And I think being a climber is about growth. It's about risk. If you want to look at it materially, you could say it's about stuff, but that isn't really where this conversation wants to go, I don't think.
No.
I think that climbers, the best traits of climbers represent the best traits of all of us.
How so? I like that. I resonate with that, but I'm curious, more precisely what you have in mind.
They have perseverance. They have courage, tenacity. I guess that's about the same. They're willing to take risks. They're willing to learn new skills. They're willing to work hard. They realize the fruits of their labors.
Yeah.
I think that those are things that are human elements, not necessarily U.S. elements.
Yeah. Status quo, it can be almost more mental or emotional lethargy.
That's a good way to put it. And it's okay to decide to be lethargic and, lounge on the couch one day. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Thank you.
I think it's a matter, we all do it, and we all need to do it, which is why climbers can become campers and campers can become climbers. But I think becoming a climber is a mindset. And it's a mindset about living your best life.
I love that, and I'd like to close with that. Pat, obviously in this conversation, this near an hour has felt like 20 minutes to me. That you have such wisdom, and what's so nice is that you are intellectually accessible. You're not so philosophically, you're very, very philosophically minded, but you can speak English so the rest of us can understand what you're talking about, which means you are extraordinarily intelligent. So I really appreciate that and just treasure our conversation together. Thank you so much.
You are too kind. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed being a guest, and all my thanks.
Thank you, Pat Wetzel. I have on the show notes I've already prepared for your Cancer Road Trip guide. There's a link to that, and there's a link to your podcast, Bump in the Road, that people can listen more to you. Is that satisfactory to you?
That's great.
Okay, thank you. I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And always remember to check out our website. You never know what you're going to find at thenextchapter.life. Until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.